hand-wringing, complaining does nothing. It honestly, it's a, excuse my French, it's a waste of damn time. Because you, the individual, are powerful, and you can make a difference, and you will make a difference in 2022. That's why when I say get out to caucus February 1st, you can do so much. Precinct chair, election judge, poll watcher, delegate, and you alone can make a difference.
The Democrats have stopped the populist movement from really entering the Democratic Party. So this populist movement, and you'll see it with the independent polls, independents right now are leaning Republican, like a lot. So this populist movement is moving towards the Republican Party right now. And the goal is to get a lot of these elitists out, right? These do-nothing politicians at the state level and at the federal level. The ones that sit there and they talk a great game, but then you look at their voting record and you're like, why'd you vote for that? Right?
If you become a delegate on February 1st, sometime in late February or early March, you can go to a convention. It's normally on Saturday, and you can endorse your state representative, your state senator. You'll hear speeches from governor candidates, attorney generals, secretary of states. And on that day, you get to choose, as one of however many delegates in that district, who becomes the endorsed candidate for your party.
Hey guys, welcome to Minnesota Uncensored. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple iTunes, we are on iHeartRadio, and we are now on Substack, my Substack. Tyler Turner, subscribe to me. I share the podcast, and I also share relevant articles, usually based around culture, based around politics, and even based around some of the podcasts, like some of the ones that will be coming up. Do you want a alternative to the liberal mainstream media? Subscribe to my podcast, Minnesota Uncensored. Also, check out Senate District 57 GOP, and that's where this is presented by, Senate District 57 Minnesota GOP. Check us out on Facebook and check us out on YouTube.
Okay, guys, terrific episode we have here. You're going to get a wealth of information. You'll get educated. Most importantly, hopefully it activates you. We're kind of meshing two different ideas together. One idea is the idea of a movement that we believe, what the movement is exactly, and what we believe will be effective for this upcoming election, and honestly moving forward, in my opinion. And then we're going to talk to an individual who's very qualified in knowing the whole process of becoming a precinct chair, becoming election judge, poll watcher. And in my opinion, they're all important, but most importantly, you get to be a delegate, and you can go all the way to the state convention, and you can rep the candidate that you want. You can have a real say in who you want, from a grassroots all the way to the state, of who you want to represent the state of Minnesota for the next governor. And so this is a great podcast, wealth of information, and I have two great individuals here. I have political activists. She's a grassroots stalwart in this area, Melissa Meach. How are you doing, Melissa?
Good, how are you?
Good. And then we also have Josh Solano. He is an administrative assistant in the state legislator in the House. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm good. How are you today, Tyler?
And guys, actually, if you go back to the very initial episode, me and Josh had a really good back and forth on critical race theory and how it's impacting our culture currently, and specifically in our schools. So he's been on before. He knows the drill. I think we're going to get right into it. I want this podcast entitled Populism in Action and Getting Out to Caucus in 2022. And I think these two ideas are essential moving forward for the GOP, and it's how we're going to be most effective to really make a difference, not just culturally, but politically. And this is how we can take back the Republican Party. And I really am putting an emphasis on that because this is really where people are going to get activated. And if you're going to sit there and you're going to complain and you have a problem what's happening at the state level or at the US or at the federal level, get off the couch, get your butts activated, get out there and get the candidates in that you want to get in. And you can do it all the way down to the precinct that you live in. Josh is going to go into great detail about that, explain exactly how you in your very neighborhood can be a voice for this movement. I would define populism, the idea of populism is a movement of the people against the establishment or the ruling elite. If you think of a populist candidate, I mean, very much the last populist candidate we had was President Donald Trump. And he had the motto, make America great again. That was his mantra, America first. That is his mantra. And he was a candidate that really saw what was happening with the working class, what was happening with the basically, you could say in other words, the common man, middle class America, and they were feeling marginalized, disenfranchised, and that movement grew all the way to getting him to be the president of the United States. I think it needs to get better. I think we need to be more activated, and we really need to define what exactly this movement means. And I think Melissa Meach is a terrific individual to have on here. And let's talk about populism a little bit. You have a great brochure. We'll probably touch on this a couple times during this podcast. You did a 10-page brochure. It's on my Substack. I talk about it in the intro for Tyler Turner, and I did her 10-page brochure, put it in an article. What is the populist movement in its definition, and what do you think it means right now currently in our society?
In its simplest terms, the populist movement is the group of individuals that feel like they were left behind as far as specifically, I don't want to say specifically, but for the most part economically, through policy, right? So historically, that has been the working class. There is no political side for the populist movement, because the populist movement can be on either side. It is just a group of individuals that feel they have been left behind. On the communist end, during the Marxist movement, you had the populist movement, which was the working class. In today's world, it's more the middle class. And so the middle class and I guess the lower class have combined as the populist movement. It's just a group of disenfranchised people who feel they've been left behind both economically and politically. And that's why you saw so many people going towards Trump, because these are actual mentalities. It's not so much, it is a philosophy, but it transcends the political spectrum. During the civil rights movement, you could say that the populists were people of color, right? Because they were left behind by social policy. They had a hard time growing economically. So the question is government policy affecting the way I put food on my table, right? If you feel that government policy is affecting your way of life, is affecting how you put food on the table, then you're a populist. Congratulations. You feel like you've been left behind. And that's all in its simplest term. That's really all it boils down to. I mean, even historians have explained it. It's a group of people that feel that they have been left behind by society, both economically and politically. Over the last, I want to say, since like 2013, 2014, this has been the middle class, suburbia, a lot of white people, you know what I mean, that feel like with even critical race theory, they feel like they've been left behind on that aspect. Like, wait, you're not including me in this. Specifically with COVID, a lot of the shutdowns, small businesses, right? They've been left behind. While these corporations are seeing mass profit, we've got mom and pop shops shutting down all over the US. They're the populist movement. So we can't look at it as a political spectrum. We have to look at it as a whole. And what happened was, initially Bernie was a populist, right? A lot of his rhetoric was very populist. That's why so many people lean towards Bernie Sanders. In the 2016 elections, though, the establishment, Hillary Clinton people, kind of stopped the populist movement from going any further in the within the Democratic Party. So what happened is it switched to the Republican Party. And the biggest failure of the populist movement is we think, and we're told this, and this is where Josh can get into more detail. We're told in order to change, you have to vote, right? You have to do your part and vote. Vote, vote, vote. We were never told it requires more than voting. It requires so much more than voting. And that's where the populace fails, is that we vote for a leader. We're following elitists. And I hate to say this, as much as you say Trump is a populist, Trump led a populist movement. He was an elitist. He was an elitist that led a populist movement. Bernie Sanders was an elitist that led a populist movement. So this populist movement has historically been led by elitists. They haven't been led by populists themselves. And what we're saying with this movement is this needs to change. We need to start leading ourselves, and it requires more than voting. It requires being active. It requires being precinct officers. It requires being electors. It requires putting in resolutions, and I know how you feel about resolutions. It requires influence, right? It requires, instead of the candidate coming to us and saying, vote for me, I represent you, we're going to go to the candidate and say, why should I vote for you?
Yeah, I mean, you did a great job of explaining it. I'll just add, to me, and how I'm going to actually write an article on my Substack about it. It is a kind of, and this can be taken out of context, and so I'm going to explain this as carefully as I can, because there's a difference between anti-statism and anarchism. Anarchism is this kind of a tribalistic revolution against the state with no actually organized strategy. Anti-statism believes a limitation of the state. You're, like, for instance, you're against the administrative state. You're just opposed to how the state has basically exploded, and you actually see it as a bipartisan thing. You fundamentally see it not even from a Republican Democratic lens, but you see that the state has just grown so big, and it's kind of monopolized into this ruling oligarchy, and you have the Republicans kind of reaching out to the one side, the Democrats, and the reason why it almost seems like they're making deals and it's just literally you're switching the party, it's because literally it's a statism kind of government. And so when I think of populism, fundamentally, I think it is the people from a very paleo organic growth. We are against the growth of statism. We are going to come together and we're going to revolutionize by taking over from the very localized level, expanding to the state level, and eventually to the federal level. And it's kind of, if you're going to take it from a playbook, you could say it's the Rules for Radicals from Saul Alinsky, where he kind of has you grow in the community, the community organization, and it kind of outgrows from there. And the left has been brilliant at that strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And we sometimes, I think this is my opinion on the GOP. We are fundamentalists, traditionalists, however you want to say it. But sometimes you have to evolve from a mentality of, if those ways aren't working, you got to do it different.
Yep.
And we have had it good in our country. We've lived off the fluent lavishing of our ancestors and the battles they have fought, but we become entitled, and we sometimes fail to grow. We fail to see how doing it different might be better, and instead of just keep on adding to the monopoly because someone runs on a very social conservative platform, that I think it's foolish. One of my favorite candidates was former U.S. House Rep. He ran for president, Ron Paul. He said, but whether the resistance against government tyrants is nonviolent or physically violent, the effort to overthrow the state oppression qualifies as true patriotism. And you're like, well, come on, that sounds a little anarchist. Let's throw in this comment by the third president of the United States, a notable anti-federalist, and he was first Secretary of State, Founding Father Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence. He said, I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of taking care of them. So you could go as far back as the anti-federalists that were the initial reasons for our freedom in the country, to say anti-statism is in the DNA of America. Now, let's move on to the next subject.
Well, before you go on,
ahead.
so I think, and that's the difference between the right and the left populists, is this idea of anti-statism, right? Because the left tends to be, the populist movement for the left tends to be very state-run, right? I'm giving you the power. Even socialistic what is it? Democratic socialist, right? That's still a state-run institution for the people. Whereas on the right, it's by the people for the people instead of by the government for the people. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's empowering the individual just opposed to empowering like still a collective centralized group. And I completely agree with you. They use good language, they do good strategy, but the implementation is basically a neo-Marxist approach that will end up in this as the same that it has in China,
historically,
Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution
Cambodia,
in Russia, Cuba. Oh, I should mention, your parents are from Cambodia, correct?
No, I am too. I was actually born there. I came here when I was 4, but yeah, we lived through communism, so very familiar with it.
Anyone not out there, Pol Pot ran one of the most tyrannical regimes in modern world history, so she would experience that. So that's kind of a firsthand experience that you don't get to see. Joshua Solano, nobody in our district understands Minnesota politics better than you. Yeah, I think we can all agree to that, and that's why we're having him on here. He can just give you a very good breakdown. So if you're getting revved up right now and you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I want to get activated, I want to take back the power, he's going to tell you exactly how you can do that, and it actually starts February 1st. So Joshua, you have the floor, and you can just go where you want with us.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler, and thank you, Melissa. I loved hearing you guys talk about populism because, to be honest, like you said, Tyler, getting involved in the caucus, movement and the procedure and the steps that it takes to do is what populism needs to become popular on both sides. I have conversations with both Democrats and Republicans that want to get involved, just because I know that if they're passionate and they have true conviction, I will educate anyone that asks me questions about how to get involved. I mean, these are some of the reasons why people get frustrated, like Melissa said, with political movements, with candidates that don't go anywhere. I mean, one of the most popular candidates in the 2020 elections on the Democratic side in Minnesota was Tulsi Gabbard. Actually, she polled very, very well here, and you could say that she was an economic populist, and she put country first compared to globalism. But why didn't she succeed in other states? And that is kind of what it comes down to, and how we do things here in Minnesota, specifically in how to get involved, how to get your candidate to move forward. So I field a lot of questions from all sides, because nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows what to do. And elites, like Melissa said, they don't make it easy. They're the ones that lead it. They're the ones that lead populist movements. They're the ones that get their supporters on their bench and to make sure that they will remain in power. But we need to get this message out there. We need to shake things up. So like you said, Tyler, the first date is February 1st. That is caucus night for both the Democrat and Republican Party in the state of Minnesota. They do this to make sure that you can't cross the aisle, that you can't sneak into another party's meetings and stuff like that. They're held at the same time, same date, all across the state. And that is that first night that you come, and it's a little different this year because of redistricting, but overall, that first night you come, you get separated into your precincts, which is basically a neighborhood in your city or in your district. And if you go onto the Minnesota Secretary of State's website, Precinct Finder, you can actually find which precinct you are from, so that when you go to caucus night on February 1st, you can become prepared and join those little breakout groups and breakout sessions. From there, you will get elected as a delegate. You can run for delegate. The reason why I encourage anybody to do this, doesn't matter which party you're from, is because if you're tired of all the mess and the trash and the elitism and the limousines that roll through your district, that's why you need to become a delegate. This goes from people in Minneapolis, this goes for people in Apple Valley and Lakeville, this goes for people in Duluth. If you're just tired of it, if you're tired of politicians getting elected for 30, 40, 50 years in Minnesota state politics, it's time to end this, right? So you show up, you run for delegate. From there, you'll move on to a BPOU convention. And in the state of Minnesota, BPOU stands for Basic Political Organization Unit, Organized Unit. And that second convention, because there's 3 steps to being a delegate, is the most important for your local elections. If you become a delegate on February 1st, sometime in late February or early March, you can go to a convention. It's normally on Saturday, and you can endorse your state representative, your state senator. You'll hear speeches from governor candidates, attorney generals, secretary of states. And on that day, you get to choose, as you know, one of however many delegates in that district, who becomes the endorsed candidate for your party. If you're always wondering like, oh, why do they keep running stupid people or this person or that person, or I'm tired of this, right? We hear a lot of these things all the time in the media, all the time in the news, you know? That's why you need to become a delegate. If you want to choose who's running in November, you need to go on February 1st and run for delegate. Then after that convention, you move on to the third and last stage. Both the Democrat and the Republican conventions are state conventions. The Democrat convention will be held in Duluth this year, and the Republican convention will be held in Rochester. They're on the same weekend, same time, so you can't cheat and vote for different parties, different people. But you go to those state conventions and you get to decide who's running for governor, attorney general, secretary of state, state auditor, all of the big constitutional offices. You get to decide who is going to represent you in November. Now, those candidates can run for a primary, but that's a different story. But that's why it's important to get involved. I'll encourage anybody to get involved, because I'm getting to this point personally in this country, in this nation, in this state right now, where I'm really tired of listening to podcasts, listening to media, listening to news sources, and they're all saying the same thing. Well, why are they running these same people? Why is Minnesota not changing? Why is this? Why is that? And I'm getting sick and tired of it, because there is something you can do, but the problem is that elitists have made sure that the populist movement on both sides of the aisle cannot get far. You know, they don't educate them. They don't get them to a level to where they say, oh, I want you to donate to me. I want you to support me. I want you to vote for me at the ballot box. But I don't want you to become a delegate, because you may not vote for me to endorse me. And that's the problem I have with politics right now. I love this podcast. Thank you for inviting me, because we need to get people involved. We need to get people excited. Like, if you're tired about Governor Walz doing something and you don't see any candidates, or you see one candidate speaking out about it, okay, you need to become a delegate and support that governor candidate all the way. Because you may come November and say, hey, I wonder what happened to, Neil Shah or Senator Benson or Senator Jensen, and they're not on the ballot. They're like, oh, I wonder what happened to them. Why aren't they here? Well, because along the way, they didn't keep you educated. They didn't keep our listeners educated here that are trying to figure out how to get involved and where their candidate went, who they supported. So that's kind of my soapbox speech. Sorry for taking so long, but that's why it's really important to go out on February 1st and become a delegate, to become a neighborhood leader, a team lead, a precinct chair, secretaries, treasurers. I mean, if you want to change your Minnesota politics, it starts in your neighborhood. And February 1st is the easiest day to do it.
Can I just add something to that as far as precinct officers? And delegates are really, really important, but so are precinct officers. Josh, I'm sorry. How many people would you say is in a precinct on average?
Oh, like population wise, or
about 10 grand.
Yeah, so each district has House district has about like 40,000, 40 to 45,000, depending on the margins. You break that down, Apple Valley, I think, has 13 precincts. So precincts are actually really small. I think they can be between 3,000 and 5,000.
3,000 and 500.
Yeah.
3,000 and 5,000. So just to kind of give you a prime example of that, let's say a person is running for governor. The population of Minnesota right now is sitting at how many in the millions?
I think it's
just under 7 million.
5.6 million.
Yeah.
So you have a candidate running for governor, right? They're looking at 5.6 million people. They can't connect with each person individually. right? That's why the precinct officer is so important, because a candidate can have 1,000 delegates endorsing him on the Republican Party. If he can't win on the main ballot, doesn't matter. That's where the precinct officer is so important, because they connect to people at the local level. The precinct officer is only dealing with between 3,000 to 5,000 people, while the governor is dealing with 5.6 million people. So you have as a precinct officer, you have a closer connection to the voter than a candidate would. Even a House candidate. A House candidate's 40,000 people, you said, right? On average, 40
Yeah.
to 45,000 people per House candidate. Your precinct's 3,000 to 5,000 people. Each precinct officer is in charge of 3,000 to 5,000 people to connect with. Whereas the House representative is dealing with 40,000 people, right? And that's why that precinct officer, precinct secretary, precinct chair, precinct co-chair, whatever you want to call it, those roles are important, because you're connecting with the individual voter to support the candidate you want. So the delegate endorses the candidate, and you're going to the voter and you're saying, this is why you should vote for this candidate on the main ballot. That's why each of these roles have their own importance. So that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, with precinct officers, like you said, the reason why it is so important is because delegates only have, their job for 3 months, basically from February to May, right? 3 to 4 months. And with precinct officers, I mean, you're elected for when you get elected at a BPOU level like that, you're elected for 2 years. So you're on the ground, getting to know people in your community, helping your community, supporting your community, getting involved in things like the Chamber of Commerce, the Parks Board, school board. You're the person that's really involved in the local city level, area of government. Because a lot of people that are, low level on the party, they have those kind of aspirations to, protect and serve their community, make them secure, prosperous, help for their vision. And becoming a precinct officer is really the first steps to saying, you know what, I'm going to become a precinct officer. I'm going to get involved. I'm going to get to know these 3,000, people in my neighborhood or whatever. And I'm going to run for Parks Board, or I'm going to run for zoning board or water or whatever. And it's kind of one of those things to where that's why it's super important, because you become a pillar of the community. Like you said, people get to know you. People come to you for questions. You're the one that's educating them primarily. And like you said, sometimes it's hard to reach your elected official, but it's easy to reach a neighbor. And that's why February 1st is so important to get involved, especially if you really want to change things in your community.
Yeah, I agree. I think you both, thanks for Josh. You really did a great job explaining the delegate and the precinct. Thank for all information. So specifically listeners, like, how do I just fired up. I'm a firebrand populist. I want to take over my neighborhood. I don't know what precinct I live in. Go to the Secretary of State's website, minnesota.gov, put in your address. It will say the precinct you are in. You then go to caucus. You then nominate yourself as precinct chair. Obviously, you'll meet all the other individuals that are at caucus in your precinct. Once you're chair, you can then plan events. You can literally plan it organically, word of mouth, through text or through social media. You can throw parties at your house. If you get to know any of the candidates, you can have the candidates come to your house and you can throw an event in your local area with the people that you have met. And that is the most organic, paleo way to get involved into politics. And I honestly think make a difference. It is Dan Schultz has a website. It's called precinctstrategy.com. Go check out his videos. He goes in depth of really illuminating and educating people on the process. But the main thing that I think anyone should get from Josh, what he said about being a precinct chair or being a delegate, be at caucus February 1st. If you miss caucus February 1st, you will not have a say in who the next governor of Minnesota is. So if you love what Kendall Qualls, I had Frieda Walden here from Take Charge Minnesota. If you love what he has to offer Minnesota, you go to caucus, become his delegate, and get him in office, whoever it is. Jensen, Neil Shaw, there's some good candidates. I have my own opinions. We're not going to go down that rabbit trail. Now we're going to get into now we can go down this rabbit trail. Might have a little something to do with what I'm talking about. Strategy for 2022, and this is both of us. We're going to all banter around ideas. We've kind of talked. I mean, we've obviously, me and Melissa well, you just have to follow us in Substack. You know where we're going with it. You know our strategy, but we're going to educate a population. And Josh, who's been involved in local politics, he has even run for the endorsement for his House district. I just found out the other night. No, never mind. I'm not going to go there. But but you can add to this too. You can add your own flavor, and also feel free. We don't all have to agree. If we have different strategies, if we have different ideas, if we think that some candidates maybe offer something but substance, feel free to bring them up. It really is one of those this little short session we're going to have of I just kind of want it to be a round table. We kind of just like tap our ideas back and forth. So what would you say? I'm gonna go with you, Josh. 2022, huge election. We are the highest. We're the minority in the House. We don't have the governorship. We don't have the attorney general. We don't have the secretary of state. We're hanging on by a thin margin in the state Senate. Something has to change. How can you give pissed off Minnesota's fire-breathing populace? How can you give them hope that we can take the House, that we can take the governorship, we can take attorney general, we can get rid of Waltz, we can get rid of Ellison? Where can you go with this that can help you get an effective strategy to winning these elections in 2022?
Yeah.
Before you go, Josh, hold on.
Yeah.
Before you go, Josh, one question.
Yeah.
Can you tell us all of the state positions that will be in the 2022 election?
Yeah, sure. I think Tyler covered a lot of them. You know, this year we have the state Senate up for re-election, the whole state Senate, the whole state House, the governor, attorney general, secretary of state, and state auditor. And people forget about her a lot, which is
so
an
even if
position.
Even if it's an off year, this is still a pretty big election cycle.
This is a really big election. This will be, I mean, on a national level too. This will be Joe Biden's, referendum vote at this point. I mean, this midterm election is incredible, and we're going to see it all over the country. But most importantly, we're going to see it here in Minnesota. And everyone is hoping for Virginia, all over their states, all over their blue states. But we'll see. And that's why, like I was going to say, first things first, this election is ours to lose. 100%. 100%. I mean, they have not only shot themselves, I mean, the governor and the major Democratic elected officials in the state, like, Mayor Fry and the city council of Minneapolis, the state secretary of state with election, buzz and possible fraud and all those things like that. Like, they have gotten media, bad press after bad press after bad press. They keep shooting themselves in the foot, in the leg, in the hands. I mean, this governor has had to put out as many fires than he has built houses at this point. And so that's why I say it is ours to lose. At this point, I think our strategy or what I believe strategy should be for current elected officials in the state House and the state Senate, if they want to make headway, is they need to check themselves, because the voters will keep them accountable. That's the truth. It doesn't matter if you're in a swing district or if you're in a completely safe district, Democrat or Republican. If you are not, left enough, the Democrats will come for you, the activists in the BPOU. Same thing in safe districts, same thing with the red districts. We're seeing, those Republicans keeping those elected officials accounted. For purple districts, like here in the suburbs, at this point, on the Democrat and Republican side, it's about what they say and what they do at this point. Either way, the voters will keep them accountable. But elected officials, especially Republicans in the House right now, what we need to do, I think, to maintain, or not maintain, but to gain more seats, because we need to gain more seats to win, is to keep themselves accountable, know their surroundings, act like there's a camera everywhere, a microphone hot at all times, because it's only going to take one bad thing for the Democrats to take that and run with it. You know, like, the things that hurt us the most as Republicans are ourselves, because this election is ours to lose. And I cannot stress that enough. That's why you have to keep our elected officials accountable. If you live in a district like ours, we're represented by 3 Democrats, you should have sharp ears like a fox and eyes like an owl, because you need to keep those elected officials accountable too. You know, we need to catch these officials in hypocrisy. We need to catch them doing the wrong things, because they are sitting here legislating most of the time to make sure that they're comfortable. And a lot of these leaders, I mean, just the other day, like you saw, AOC, I think for her birthday, was in Florida partying, when she has been so vocal for years, for 2 years now, about the state of Florida and all of their laws and how it's terrible. But then she's going off and doing, you know, hypocritical things. But it's that process that I'm talking about. You know, strategy baseline, we got to check our actions. We got to check our thoughts. We got to check our voices, and then keep those elected officials accountable. There's a lot more to this election than just that. But that would be like my biggest advice to current elected officials, is to just check themselves. On the grassroots level, like I'm sure Melissa will talk about, I mean, there is more of a movement that we need to do. There is a fire that we need to burn through those prairies, controlled. You know, we can't just be, I'm not an anarchist. I'm not an anarchist. I'm not going to tout that I think we should do it. Controlled burns of the prairie. And I'm sure Melissa will get into that more grassroots activist message and what we need to do as an army, as a unit, as a voice. But baseline for me, that's what we need to do.
Okay, Melissa, what's your strategy? What do you see? You wrote a 10-page brochure on this. It's called Leveraging the Republican Party.
Right.
It's on my Substack. Go check it out, guys. So your referendum for the Biden regime is what?
So let's start here, okay? Let's start with, you know, and I do really want to touch on this. There's a lot of cheating stuff, like, oh, what's the point? Cheating, blah, blah, blah. That does need to be addressed. Because as long as people have that mentality, they're not going to be active, because what's the point, right? Mm-hmm. The only way to win at this point in time is to win by a large margin. And I've said it before, we have to win by a large margin. So even if the other side cheats, they're not going to win. It doesn't matter how much they cheat, they won't win if we win by a large enough margin. Here's the thing, though. From what I'm seeing right now, the Democrats know, with the way the polls and everything are reading, that the Republicans are about to win by a large margin, So what their new strategy is right now is to try to, and this goes back to what Josh was saying, they're going to try to discredit Republicans. They're going to try to get them to drop out. They're going to try to get them, Marjorie Taylor Greene, prime example right now. They're trying to push her out. They're trying to figure out different ways where she's disqualified from running, right? So as this is why it's so important that any candidate we choose, we do need to hold accountable. They need to be on their P's and Q's, because the smallest thing in the world, if the Democrats can get them disqualified because they know there's no way they're going to win against, and I'm just throwing a name out there, there's no way they're going to win against, let's say, John Doe, right? They're going to try to get John Doe disqualified. And then all of our work becomes pointless. So it's really, 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 really important, as Josh says, I want to stress it again, that we hold whatever candidate we put in place, we properly vie that candidate. We take a close look at that candidate. We make sure that candidate takes responsibility for any wrongdoing that candidate has done or will do, and that he is on his P's and Q's. So at that level, I just want to say how important that is. So now we get to the grassroots level. And this is about, as I said earlier, the Democrats have stopped the populist movement from really entering the Democratic Party. So this populist movement, and you'll see it with the independent polls. Independents right now are leaning Republican, like a lot. So this populist movement is moving towards the Republican Party right now. And the goal is to get a lot of these elitists out, right? These do nothing politicians at the state level and at the federal level. The ones that sit there and they talk a great game, but then you look at their voting record and you're like, why'd you vote for that? Right? It's important to remove them and put people more in touch with the movement into Congress. So it's not just delegates. It's not just precinct officers. Hey, if you are an everyday Joe that's in touch with the community and you want to run for candidate, let us know, right? Let us take a look at you. Let us see. We need people that are in touch with the populist movement, with the everyday people running for office, precinct officers, delegates, school board, city council. We need them in all of these positions because guess what? All of these positions affect everyday life, especially at the local level. So the goal is to get more people involved. Quit saying just go do your part and vote. That's not doing your part anymore. We need you to do more than your part. Voting isn't enough anymore. We need you to go to precinct caucus. We need you to go to city council meetings. We need you to go to school board meetings. We need you to run for school board. We need you to run for city council. We need you to run for the House district, the Senate district. Basically what it comes down to is we're no longer going to have these nobody elites running the populist movement anymore. Now it's going to be a movement by the people for the people. It's going to be everyday Joes that are elected in office that can go home and tell their neighborhood, hey, I did this policy because I saw it was affecting our community. So I made sure that you can't just close a small business down. The governor can't just close a small business down because that business is bringing money into Farmington or into Lakeville. And now that business is shut down, it's no longer bringing in that income into the city as a whole. We can't grow the city anymore, right? So we need everyday people that are in touch with that type of stuff to run for these positions, whether it is precinct officer or governor. It doesn't matter what position it is. We got to get all of these conservative. I don't want to use conservative like it's a bad word, but like all of these, what is it, the popular term now, rhinos.
Or I would say more specifically, it's like established Republicans that more than likely have been there for a considerable amount of time, and are working in cahoots and more with the
corporations, right?
Or you could say the overall oligarchy that develops both on the federal and the state level.
Right. And some good things I can say about AOC and Ilhan Omar, even though I don't have a lot of good things, is they went in and they kind of shuffled the Democratic Party a little bit, right? And we need to do that same thing on the Republican side now. Go ahead.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, Melissa, because you know how Ilhan Omar got elected?
Yep. We talked about the story. Tell everybody.
We talked about the story. It's because exactly what we're talking about now.
Yep.
She came 4 years ago to her district convention, to her, she started at BPOUs and CD5. I think there's a handful of them, 5 or 6 BPOUs and CD5 or something like that. I can't remember. She went there. She instilled her own delegates, her own precinct chairs, precinct secretaries, treasurers. She took what we're talking about now on February 1st, 4 years ago, and she put every single one of her supporters and her pawns in that place so that when they went to go for endorsement, because I think there was a numerous amount of people running for that open congressional seat. She had people stacked. They call them slates. Professional politicians in the state of Minnesota call them slating. because they already have those numbers picked out. So people are wondering, well, how did Ilhan Omar get elected in the state of Minnesota? How is this possible? She's not the best candidate. Ba-da-da-da-da. Anderson Kelleher was probably the best candidate, to be completely honest. She was also running. It's because she slated. It's because she went to February 1st and she did all this grassroots movements that Melissa is talking about. It's the same thing with AOC. She knocked on every single door to knock out heir apparent, U.S. congressman, whatever his name was, and destroyed a 30-year career just by knocking on doors.
Right. And she had the help of Justice Democrats. So, and that's what Dakota County Patriots, I think, is set up, is to kind of help people, realize their own potential. Connect voters to governance, if that makes any sense at all. And that's our goal, is to connect the voter to make sure that their voices are amplified. So hopefully we can we can say, hey, we have 100 delegates right now. You as a governor, what can you, because we're going to all vote the same. So what can you as a governor give to us? Tell us why we should endorse you. Imagine that type of power. Instead of an individual delegate, we now have 100 delegates across 10 precincts. You need to give us a reason to endorse you.
So I'm going to touch on a couple things. You guys make great points. I appreciate all of them. First of all, you do hear a lot in conservative circles and Republicans, a lot of individuals that are listening to this podcast about election integrity. They are afraid. And if you, as an individual, want to make a difference, when you go to caucus February 1st, when you're in your precinct room, volunteer to be both an election judge and a poll watcher. You then can make a difference very real time in the possible discrepancies that could happen. You can be there on election day. You can be you could be a judge or a poll watcher. Volunteer. Every single person that goes to caucus in your precinct needs to at least put themselves up there and say, hey, I'm willing to fight what I feel to make sure that there is legitimate elections and elections that really are fair because they are legitimate. Another way is if you're fighting for a candidate on the grassroots level, you want someone to be a state senator, you want someone to be in the state house. You say, hey, when you go there, you're going to push forward for a bill to close any loopholes there is. Because there's this concept called canvassing that has been exploited mainly in the urban areas, which goes out day of voting and individuals canvass, very grassroots also. And you canvass, making sure people are getting out to vote. And then there's that same day registration that is not as accurate as the regular voter registration. There is some discrepancies with this. I have personally talked to some senators on our state level, and they've been very advantageous, especially in more urban areas, and taking advantage of that. So you could have your legislator, when he gets elected, he goes up there to the House, he goes up there to the Senate, and he puts forth a bill or a proposal of, hey, let's maybe fight against that loophole, or in some way he attacks that issue. And so that is all about whoever you put forward to be the legislator of the House. But if I had to say the strategy more than anything, if I was going to talk to my audience directly and look them in the eye, it is you. It is you, everyday American. It is you, working class America. It's the stay-at-home mom. It's the teacher. It's the construction worker, the electrician, the plumber. It is a small business owner. It is you deciding, I've had enough. I want to take back my country. I want to take it back to the founding. Remember the individuals who fought. I'm a civics and history teacher. I love American history. I love our founding government, the U.S. Constitution. And why do I love it so much? Because it was the vigor and fight that our founders had more than anything to protect the individual. They saw the possibility of what could happen to government. They wanted their freedom from the aristocracy that was in Britain, and they wanted to protect the natural rights of the individual because they knew that government and its outgrowth could always be used or weaponized against the very individual it was supposed to protect. And that's what matters, is you, because you alone can make a difference. You alone can take it back to its constitutional order in the way that America was created, the way our Constitution supported that premise. So what matters is you. That's why when I say get out to caucus February 1st, you can do so much. Precinct chair, election judge, poll watcher, delegate, and you alone can make a difference. Hand wringing, complaining does nothing. It honestly, it's a, excuse my French, it's a waste of damn time. Because you, person, you, the individual, are powerful, and you can make a difference, and you will make a difference in 2022. So that's my message to anyone that's listening to this, because that's, in my opinion, it boils down to it. Now, so we're coming to the end here. This has been a great podcast. You've learned about the populist movement. You've learned about strategy. You've learned about caucus, become a delegate, election judge, everything. Melissa, is there any last words you'd have to say to kind of like finish off this podcast, or are you just like out of words?
No, I just want to let everybody know, we are in Dakota County Patriots right now. We are in the process of building a website. It's going to be very informative, detailed information. We're going to try to gather things. I know one of the concerns about election fraud was, how do we find it? So we're going to make sure to gather all the information that you need, involving anything involving governance. So it's in one central location for you. So it's easy for everybody to find. And I think that's a large part of the problem, is a lot of people don't know where to find the information. So the big thing for us is putting it all in one location so it's easy for everybody to find. So then there's no more excuses. Because if every individual came together, if every you, as you said, came together, that's one powerful force.
Exactly. So if they wanted to contact you, how is it best to contact you?
Meech.melissa@gmail.com for now, until I get everything else set up. So
Gotcha. Josh, final words to wrap this sucker up?
Yeah, final words. I would just say, like, just a big shout out to people like Melissa here in this podcast today. We've gotten to have a few conversations just together, the three of us, and I think it's great. You know, I'm a wealth of knowledge. I won't deny, like, I love my job. I love what I do. We had a kind of a conversation, what was it, on Friday, about, you know, my future a little bit, on what we're doing, what I might be doing. But I know, like, if you have any questions, if you want to talk to me, that's great. But where I would direct you to is people like Melissa, people like Dakota County Patriots, grassroots levels, community levels, because those are the people that are going to get you involved. And I'm always here for questions. I love being a guest on this podcast. But final words, if you want to see the change in the community that you've been ranting and raving about on Facebook, a quick email to someone like Melissa will literally change your life and possibly your state.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Guys, also a good way, contact. This is SD57GOP.org. Contact us online. Send us an email. Say, hey, I want to go to caucus. I want to get involved. I want to help out. You can also contact me. Probably the best place right now, hit me up on Substack. I'm writing a lot of articles and a lot of content, and I'm putting this podcast on there because I want people to really be educated. I want people to be activated. And I want to kick some butt in 2022. So,
yeah.
individual, you're the one that can do it. You're the one that can make a difference. Melissa Meech, Josh Solano, I appreciate you coming on today. And I hope that people learned a lot from the information they got here today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
All right. Have a great one.